6 months after my wife's brother destroyed my career, he came back to my house. It was raining that night. I opened the door and found Daniel standing on my doorstep. He looked nothing like the man I'd known for 20 years. No confidence, no expensive watch, no excuses. Just a folder clutched against his chest. I looked at him and said, "What do you want?" He swallowed. "I need you to sign something." I almost shut the door. Then he said, "If you don't sign it, I'm finished." I looked down at the folder. "Why would I help you?" He didn't answer. So I opened the folder myself, and when I saw what he'd written, I realized he wasn't asking me to forgive him. He was asking me to lie. 6 months earlier, I thought I'd lost everything. My boss called me into his office on a Thursday morning. He shut the door. Then he said, "We're terminating your employment effective immediately." I honestly thought I'd misheard him. Then he showed me an email supposedly written by me, admitting I'd falsified company records. I read it twice. Then I said, "I didn't write this." My boss looked at me. "Are you saying someone accessed your account?" "Yes." "Who?" I looked around the room, and there was one person I couldn't bring myself to accuse. My wife's brother, Daniel. I'd known him for almost 20 years. He'd sat at my dining table, celebrated Christmas with my family, stood beside me at his father's funeral, and I genuinely believed I could trust him. I was wrong. I worked for a logistics company. I'd been there for 11 years. My job was operations and compliance. It wasn't glamorous, but I was good at it. I knew the systems, I knew the staff, and I'd never been disciplined. Then Daniel joined the company. He worked in procurement, not directly under me, but close enough that we crossed paths regularly. At first I was pleased. Family and work can be dangerous together, but I thought we were mature enough to handle it. Daniel was ambitious. He wanted a promotion. He wanted senior management to see him as someone capable of handling bigger accounts. There was nothing wrong with that. The problem was that his numbers weren't good. Several supplier contracts were costing the company more than expected. One major client had complained about repeated delays. Daniel blamed the warehouse. The warehouse blamed transport. Transport blamed procurement. Everyone had an explanation. Then my name started appearing on documents I hadn't approved. The first time I ignored it. A compliance report carried my digital approval. I knew I hadn't signed it. I mentioned it to Daniel. He laughed. Probably the system. I asked him to check. He said he would. Nothing happened. 2 months later, another report appeared. Again my name. Again I hadn't approved it. This time I contacted IT. They told me my credentials had been used. I changed my password immediately. I told my manager. He said, "Keep an eye on it." I should have pushed harder. I didn't, because I trusted the people around me. That was my mistake. Then a financial discrepancy appeared. A supplier had been paid £94,000 more than the approved amount. The payment carried my authorization. I knew immediately I was in trouble. I told my manager, "I didn't approve this." He looked at the screen. Then he said, "The system says you did." That evening I called Sarah. I told her something strange was happening at work. She asked if Daniel was involved. I said, "I don't know." She went quiet. Then she said, "Be careful." I asked her why. She said Daniel was under a lot of pressure. I asked, "What kind of pressure?" She didn't answer. 3 weeks later, I was called into a disciplinary meeting. HR, my manager, someone from legal, and Daniel's department head. They put 6 documents in front of me. Every one of them was connected to the financial irregularities. Everyone carried my name. Then they showed me the email. It was supposedly from me. It said I'd made an error in the payment process and authorized the supplier payment without completing the required checks. I read it twice. Then I said, "I didn't write this." The HR manager asked, "Are you saying someone accessed your account?" I said yes. Then she asked the question I was dreading. Who? I looked around that room, and I still couldn't accuse Daniel without proof. So I said, I don't know. 2 days later, I was fired. 11 years. Gone in one meeting. I walked out carrying a cardboard box. My old fountain pen was inside my desk. It had belonged to my father-in-law. He'd given it to me years earlier and told me, use it when something matters. I'd used it to sign mortgages, school forms, contracts, important documents. That day it was the only thing on my desk that still felt like mine. I put it in my pocket, and I walked out. Sarah was waiting at home. She was furious, then devastated. She kept saying, they can't do this. I told her, they just did. She asked me whether I'd made the mistake. I looked at her. No. She believed me. At least, I thought she did. A solicitor reviewed the evidence. He immediately noticed something strange. The email supposedly sent by me had been created from an IP address associated with another office, Daniel's office. That didn't prove he wrote it, but it was enough to reopen the investigation. Then IT discovered something else. My credentials had been accessed from a workstation used by Daniel. Daniel said he'd borrowed the computer for a meeting. That explanation might have worked. If the access hadn't happened at 11:37 p.m., Daniel wasn't supposed to be in the building. The company suspended him. The investigation expanded, and suddenly, Daniel called me, not as my wife's brother, as someone terrified of what was about to happen. He said, we need to talk. I asked, about what? He said, about what happened at work. I replied, I think we've got nothing to discuss. He said, you don't understand. I said, I understand enough. Then he hung up. That evening, Sarah came into our bedroom crying. She sat on the edge of the bed. For a few seconds, she couldn't speak. Then she said, Daniel told me something. I asked what. She looked at me. He used your login. I felt sick. I asked, did he admit it? She nodded. Then she told me why. Daniel had made serious mistakes in a major procurement contract. A supplier had overcharged the company. Instead of admitting it, Daniel tried to move the discrepancy between accounts. When that failed, he used my credentials. Then he created documents suggesting I'd approved the transactions. He thought management would blame me, and it worked. For a while, I looked at Sarah and asked, did he tell you why he chose me? She started crying. Then she said, he thought you'd get another job quickly. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe someone could destroy 11 years of another person's career and think the inconvenience would be temporary. Daniel was eventually dismissed from the company. There were legal consequences. The company recovered some of the money. My dismissal was formally overturned. My name was cleared. I was offered my old job back. I said no. I couldn't walk back into that building and pretend nothing had happened. The company paid compensation, but there was still something I couldn't recover. Trust. For months, Daniel stayed away from us. Sarah continued speaking to him. I didn't stop her. He was her brother. But I told her, he's not welcome in my home until I'm ready. She respected that. 6 months passed. Then on a rainy Tuesday evening, someone knocked on our door. It was Daniel. He looked exhausted. He wasn't dressed like the confident man I remembered. He stood there holding a folder, and in his other hand was nothing. No expensive watch. No briefcase. Just the folder. He said, I need to talk to you. I said, why? He looked down. Because I need your help. I almost closed the door. Then he said, I'll lose my professional registration if this goes through. I stared at him. You should. He nodded. I know. That surprised me. Then he opened the folder. Inside was a statement. He placed it in my hands. I read the first few lines. Then I looked at him. "What exactly do you want me to sign?" I read the statement again. Then I looked at Daniel. He said, "If you sign this, it will show there was confusion about who approved what." I laughed. "Confusion?" He said, "Please." I asked, "Why would I sign something that isn't true?" He didn't answer. I looked down at the document again. It suggested that I had known about the transactions, that I had been aware of the payments, that I'd played a part in what happened. In other words, Daniel wasn't asking me to forgive him. He was asking me to help rewrite the truth. Then I saw the old black fountain pen sitting on my desk, the same pen I'd taken from my office on the day he destroyed my career. I picked it up. Daniel stared at it. He remembered it. I turned it slowly between my fingers. Then I said, "You know what this is?" He nodded. "My father-in-law gave it to me years ago. He told me to use it when something mattered." I looked at Daniel. "This matters." Then I put the pen down. "I'm not signing it." Daniel started crying. I didn't move. I asked him, "Do you know what happened to me after you got me fired?" He nodded. I said, "No, you don't." I told him about sitting in my car outside my house because I was ashamed, about my children asking why Dad wasn't working, about my son wondering whether we could still afford his university plans, about Sarah waking up at night worrying about our mortgage, about questioning my own judgment. He listened. He didn't interrupt. Then he said, "I was desperate." I replied, "Desperation explains what you did. It doesn't make it acceptable." He nodded. Then he said, "I don't expect you to forgive me." I asked, "Then why are you here?" He looked at the pen. Then he said, "Because you're the only person who can tell the truth." That sentence changed something. Not enough to forgive him, but enough to listen. I asked what he wanted. He said, "I want to withdraw the statement." I stared at him. He continued, "My solicitor said I could reduce the damage if you accepted some responsibility." I asked, "And?" He looked at me. I couldn't do it. I asked why. He looked down at the pen, then said, "Because I've already taken enough from you." For the first time, I believed him, not because he was crying, not because he was my wife's brother, because he finally wasn't asking me to protect him. He was admitting what he'd done. I didn't sign the document. Instead, I wrote a statement of my own. Everything I knew, everything I'd discovered, everything he'd admitted. I gave it to the solicitor. Daniel signed his own confession, and that confession ended his professional career. But it also stopped him from destroying mine again. My fountain pen stayed on my desk. I still use it. Because my father-in-law once told me, use it when something matters. And I've learned something since then. Sometimes the most important thing you can sign isn't a contract. It's the truth.